Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems, and with me is Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute.
Your mobile phone has an operating system. Your automobile runs on multiple circuits that make up an operating system. Our belief system makes up our personal operating system, and your sales role in business runs on an operating system. Learn how your operating system can contribute and improve your P&L as Bill and I welcome our guest and Schoolcraft to discuss getting a grip on sales on episode 557 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
All right, I'm looking forward to this interview with Ann, and obviously since we have a guest, we're going to skip our book club this week. Next week, the book is What Great Salespeople Do, which we've been in, where I'll be on chapter 8, Empathic Listening. I had to make sure I didn't say empathetic. It's empathic listening. So
that's the key to sales. I think if a salesperson is being empathetic or empathic, they're really able to see things from the prospect's point of view. So that'll be a great chapter next week. Ann Schoolcraft spent about a decade in the medical device industry before she decided to stay home with her kids. But when her entrepreneur husband needed a hand in his IT company, she quickly found herself working in and eventually leading the business. During that time, she was introduced to the EOS and put it to work with the help of a professional implementer. With the EOS framework in place, they were able to improve profitability, improve employee retention, and efficiency. So much so that Ann is now freed to teach EOS in other entrepreneurial companies. She's now a full-time EOS implementer, helping other entrepreneurs to get what they want from their business. Ann, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to learning about the EOS system. And as I said, the key word is operating system. And I think when salespeople have operating systems, it makes it a lot easier for them to make decisions, because they made the decision before they needed to make a decision. So I'm really interested in learning more about how this works in sales, and for salespeople, sales managers, and business owners to be able to incorporate it into the culture of the organization. So we've prepared a few questions for you. And I think one thing that we should probably do is clarify, you're an EOS implementer. And so what does that mean?
Oh, thanks for asking. Really, as you said in the intro, I get to help people get what they want from their businesses. So I do that by providing a complete system with simple tools to help you do three things that we call vision, traction, and healthy. Vision, from the standpoint of getting your leaders 100% on the same page with where your organization's going and how it's going to get there. Traction, from the standpoint of helping your leaders become more disciplined and accountable, executing really well to achieve every part of your vision. And healthy, meaning helping your leaders become a healthy, functional, cohesive leadership team, because unfortunately, leaders often don't function well as a team. From there, as goes the leadership team, so goes the rest of the organization. We get to a point where the entire organization, every single employee, is crystal clear on your vision, much more disciplined and accountable on executing, gaining consistent traction, and advancing as a healthy, functional, cohesive team. So the way we achieve that is, as you mentioned, EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system. It's not software. It is a set of tools and disciplines that harmonize and orchestrate all the moving parts in an entrepreneurial business.
Great. I love how you referred to tools and it's being an operating system, and some of the things that you mentioned on the three areas. One of them is healthy. And when I think about an organization working together, I don't know if you're a fan or have read the book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Oh yeah, it's a favorite.
Is this something that, can be incorporated and complement the EOS system?
Absolutely. So when part of the EOS system is a meeting pulse where we do quarterly and annual planning, and every annual planning session, we take some time to go through that exact book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and really evaluate and get open and honest with each other about how well are we doing on those 5 areas. Yeah, very powerful.
I just imagine that being a great compliment, starting off with trust and then managing conflict, etc.
Mhm.
And really collaborating with EOS. It's an interesting, history of Gino Wickman. I don't know if you know what
Mhm.
his father did. His
It
father,
it it
go
was
ahead.
sales training, right?
Yeah, Floyd Wickman, who
Yes.
concentrated in real estate training. And when I got my real estate license, I was a fan of Floyd Wickman, and his group that he had was called the Sweat Hogs. And if you ever watch Welcome Back, Kotter, they had the
Oh
Sweat Hogs on
yeah,
there,
you're
and then
right.
Floyd comes out with the Sweat Hogs. So those
That's
of you
so
that are playing
funny.
along at home and have a career in real estate sales and you're over 50, you would be able to recognize some of that analogies.
So
But
now we're going back to the ancient history here for you.
we are. I just
Right.
want to be able to add some context and let those people know that if you're over 55 and you're listening to a podcast, you're still hip. You're still
Woohoo!
hip. So you mentioned tools, and I always think when
Yeah,
it comes to a system and a process, tools are so important. Can you tell us a little bit more about the tools that you use and teach?
yeah. So EOS has an amazing toolbox with over 20 tools. But for today's purposes, I'd like to just focus on the 5 foundation tools that everybody learns up front. Um, so the first one is something called the Vision Traction Organizer, affectionately known as the VTO, because that's a mouthful. But
Mm.
it's just a 2-page document that answers 8 super important questions. And if you can get clear on those and share that with your whole organization, it's going to start building up that vision component. So the 8 questions are: what are your core values? What is your core focus? So think mission, vision. What's your 10-year target? What's your marketing strategy? 3-year picture, 1-year plan, quarterly rocks, and I'll get to that in a minute, and then an issues list. And all of that just fits on 2 sides of a piece of paper, very compact way to share your vision. The second tool is the accountability chart. And this is like an org chart, but we approach it a little bit differently. So we step back and look at the structure first. We want to make sure that we're clear on the structure the organization needs to go to the next level. And it's very important to identify the major functions of the business and have one person accountable for each one. So every organization has some kind of sales and marketing function bringing in business, some kind of operations function providing the service or making the product, and some kind of finance function managing all the assets of the business. All 3 have to be strong. All 3 need to have one person accountable. So we clarify the unique structure of that business based on kind of that basic framework. And then we clarify the 5 or so things that each of those functions is accountable for to the organization. So we're crystal clear. The owner of the sales function is accountable for maybe making the sales plan and hitting their team quota and driving a certain number of leads, all of that stuff. Then we put people in seats once the structure and the roles are clear. And the criteria to be in the right seat, we love Jim Collins in EOS. We talk about right people, right seats all the time. Right people has to do with the matching the core values on your VTO. Right seats means that for the seat you're in on the accountability chart, you get it. You have the natural talent. You want it. You're actually passionate about the work. And you have the capacity to do it, which means you have the adequate skill and experience to do it at the level we need. When those 3 criteria are met, then you get put in that seat. The next tool is something called rocks. I mentioned this on the VTO. These are just 90-day priorities or goals that move our plan forward. So human nature, we can focus on a goal for about 90 days before we get really distracted. And so we just, every 90 days, we're setting a goal, seeing how we did, set the next goal, and keep that momentum moving forward on our plan. A scorecard is just a handful of numbers that give you an absolute pulse on the business or on the department every single week. And we try to put these into forward-looking leading indicators and weekly activity-based metrics that really give us a pulse on where we're headed. I'll talk a little bit more about that later when we dig into the sales team specifically. And then the last discipline on my top 5 here is the meeting pulse. So this is a combination of weekly meetings that we call level 10 meetings. They follow a very specific agenda. but they have built-in accountability for the numbers on the scorecard, progress on the rocks. And then we spend time solving our most important issues, getting really good at setting them up and knocking them down every single week. So those level 10 meetings happen weekly, but then once a quarter, we take a whole day to step back, see how we did on our rocks, set new rocks, learn some tools, solve the big long-term issues. And then one of those quarterlies every year is that 2-day annual I mentioned, where we dig deeper on team health and really lay out the entire plan for the year. So my clients learn those first 5 tools in the first 60 days of an engagement, and then they continue to use those ongoing as long as they're running on EOS.
So, Ann, one question I had as you were talking about the VTO, you went over that fairly quickly, but that's a tough document when you're talking about what is your strategy, what is your vision. One of the things I found is that companies often say they have a vision, they say they have goals, and then when challenges come, well, the vision goes out the window. Our core values are only our core values as long as we're making a lot of money. But then when things go bad, well, we'll skip our core values. And I always like to have core values as a lens for everybody in the company to look through and say, here's how I can make a decision. Treating our customer right is a core value until it's not a core value. And until there's a challenge. So how do you get them to really mean these things and live by them rather than just have it be a nice vision or a nice core value that we think we want?
Yeah. So this is one of the things I love about EOS is the way the whole system integrates. So when you take the VTO, if you just created it in isolation and then put it on the shelf, it would be exactly what you said. It's like, oh, that's nice. And maybe it gets used and maybe not. But when you integrate it with the meeting pulse, what you get is reinforcement every single 90 days. So we come together, not only do we set rocks, but we go through every single question on the VTO and say, are we 100% on the same page about this? Okay, are we actually using this? Are we using the core values to hire and fire people? Are we using the core focus to make sure that we're staying in our sweet spot and not wandering after shiny objects? And we go through that every single quarter, questioning it, refining it, tweaking it, clarifying it, so that it truly becomes our DNA. And as EOS then works down into the organization, the leadership team takes ownership of that VTO and is teaching it to their team. They're going over it with the team every quarter. They're adding it into departmental level 10 meetings, departmental quarterlies, and trickles its way down. So it's woven into absolutely everything.
And what happens when as you're teaching this, or as the leadership is teaching this and they don't live by it? You know what I mean?
Yes.
When somebody in a subordinate says, hey, look, you said this was important, but then when I had to make a decision, I got pinged for it because I followed what I thought was the vision.
Yeah. So we definitely encourage that kind of open and honest dialogue, which most teams don't have right off the bat. It takes some practice. And so early on in the process, as I'm working with the leadership team, I ask them to give each other feedback on, okay, we've said these are our core values. Time to rate each other. How do you guys do on these for real?
Right.
And getting them to have that dialogue with each other so they begin to be comfortable having those conversations with employees and receiving feedback from employees as well.
With all the meetings that you have, that seems like a lot of time putting into the operating system, but I'm sure that there's efficiency because it is an operating system and it's been proven and tested over time.
Yes.
How do you manage the meetings? It just sounds like a lot of time, and salespeople just kind of always struggle with the sales meetings. And I imagine that happens in other departments as well.
Oh, for sure.
How do we coordinate all of that?
For sure. So at the leadership team level, it's pretty prescriptive. So weekly level 10 meeting for 90 minutes as a leadership team, quarterly sessions for planning are a full day. And as you say, a lot of clients think that sounds like a lot of time. But the way the meeting is structured, you get so much done. The level 10 becomes your most valuable 90 minutes of your week. And it becomes much easier when somebody comes in to poke their head in your office or pop up on your chat and say, hey, do you have a minute? And of course you don't. It
Right.
becomes much easier to say, can you take your thing and put it on the issues list for the level 10 meeting? And then we just address all of that at once, unless it's a real emergency. If something's on fire,
course,
you got to do it. But a lot of the just interruptions can be very nicely compartmentalized into these meetings. And then when it gets down to the department level, when we talk about a sales team level 10 or an ops team level 10, those can be customized to the needs of the team. So whether that's a shorter meeting or a different frequency, that can be customized so that it's meeting the team's needs optimally.
And I imagine because of the system, the meetings are a lot more efficient. So you get more done within a period of time. So people hopefully are less frustrated when they're talking about the meetings.
Well, it sounds like the meetings actually have an agenda rather than
they do.
Here's we're going to have our Monday morning meeting. What do you want to talk about? And
right.
So meetings that get something done are encouraged.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm a little bit familiar with the traction model, and the pie has 6 pieces to it, with your business being in the middle. And and I noticed that there is no sales piece of pie. So how does EOS integrate? I know you have a people one, but how does EOS help clients in the area of sales?
Yeah, so EOS is a holistic system. It's for an entire business, and it will help every function of the business. And we recognize right up front that sales is one of the major functions. There needs to be a sales leader on the leadership team, and everything that the leadership team does needs to trickle down into those major function departments. So I've seen it help out in a couple of ways. That is to say, I've seen it work out in a lot of ways. Often with my clients, the founder is sitting in the sales seat. They're leading the charge on sales, pretty common. And often as the founder, they also have other interests and often are sitting in other seats, pretty common. And so one of the entrepreneurs I worked with, he was a very talented salesman, but was also running operations and also handling finance. And so he was constantly pulled in a million directions trying to do all of those things and, be the chief cook and bottle washer. So we used the accountability chart tool to map out what those roles were for the major functions. And one of the major functions I didn't mention earlier is the idea of an integrator. So this is the idea of kind of the general manager, the COO, that integrates and harmonizes the major functions of the business. So when my client brought in an integrator, that gentleman was very talented and interested in handling the finance part of the organization and was equipped to train and mentor their future operations leader. And so the founder could focus on doing sales, which he loved, and he's killing it. Every quarter he sets a rock for sales that he needs to bring in that quarter, and he just smokes it every time. It's amazing because he can be laser focused on what he does best and what brings the most value to the organization. Another example of a founder in sales. So when we talked about the accountability chart and the idea of get it, want it, and capacity to do it, this founder was good at sales, understood how to do it. He got it. He had the capacity to do it, but he didn't want it. He found it super, super draining. And so as you talked about the EOS model, one of the components of the EOS model is process. And so this founder found his solve in process. He documented his sales process, made it very, very clear, and then found a member of his team who did GWC that seat. Not only did he get it, he was working on his capacity to do it, but he wanted it and he loved it, and he was a booster for the company. And so he was able to use that process to train someone to take over that sales seat to free him up to do what he wanted to do. So in both cases, it was a matter of right people, right seats, but different tools to get you there.
So one of the things that we find, and I'm sure you've dealt with this yourself, Ann, is that I'm somewhere in the middle of the organization. Maybe I'm a sales leader or maybe
Mhm.
I'm a salesperson out in the field.
Mhm.
This all sounds really good, but my management isn't necessarily doing this. Is there a way that we can take these concepts as individuals or as team leaders, even if we can't influence the entire organization? How can we use these great tools to influence ourselves, to give ourselves better direction on a daily basis?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to think that all of the tools in EOS are applicable at any level. And it can be an uphill battle if your leadership isn't on board with it, for sure. But there are some concepts I think that anybody can apply and help them get where they want to go. Um, so what we've found working with entrepreneurial companies is that there's kind of a difference between sales teams that are really hitting it and sales teams that are constantly struggling. And there's a handful of things we've seen. So let me share those because you could apply these individually or as a team. So the first one is having a sales manager where it's very clear that that person is accountable for the sales team. There's an underlying theme in EOS of clarity. Like the more clear we can be, one person is accountable, because if two people are accountable, nobody's accountable. That kind of stuff. You've got to have clear accountability. And if that means each territory has someone who's clearly accountable, or if each product line has someone who's clearly accountable, you've got to make it crystal clear, because otherwise you're going to wait for the other guy to do the thing. Another concept that I think any salesperson can use is the marketing section of the VTO. We call the marketing strategy, and has 4 parts that are going to be important for any sales endeavor. The first one is clarifying your target market. Who is going to make your best customer? Who's going to be your most profitable customer, the most fun to work with? Probably a simpler sale a lot of times. Getting super, super clear on where they are, what kind of business they're in, and how they think. And really listing that out so that we can target our precious sales and marketing efforts at that target market and really use that to create our list, whether we're cold calling or sending out emails or whatever it is. We're not just scattershot talking to the whole world, but we're really targeted on who's going to make the best customer. The second piece, we call it the 3 uniques. You guys probably think of the idea of differentiators, but it's just the top 3 things that set you apart from your competition. So you may have 1 or 2 of those things in common with another competitor, but nobody has that unique combination of 3. And so understanding who you're talking to and the unique message that's going to be compelling to them is huge. And if it's a team situation, having everybody share that messaging consistently is super, super important. But even if you're an individual out there on your own, you've got to know what sets you apart. The next piece, some organizations find it helpful to have what we call a proven process. So this is a visual illustration of how you take care of your customers. It lets them know that you're not practicing on them. You're not just making it up on the fly. You've got a refined operation that's going to take care of them once the sale closes. Some teams find that helpful, some not, but it can set you apart, just show a different level of sophistication. And the fourth piece is a guarantee. Some industries this makes sense and some it doesn't. But I encourage people to, even if they're like, I don't know if we can offer a guarantee, think about something that's a common fear or objection and find a way to turn it for your advantage. Deliver it on time or it's free, that kind of stuff, just to take some fear off the table and set you apart. The next one is having a clear sales process. So just like my client who had to go through and document his sales process and teach it to someone else, that secret sauce is really, really important. You can't just leave it up to fate or personality, especially when you get to a team environment. You want to have a clear, documented, simplified, followed by all sales process. Another piece that I'm sure you guys are familiar with is the idea of sales culture and approach being, again, crystal clear. So are we transactional? Are we relationship based? Are we doing salary or commission? Is this a product, a service, a commodity, an experience? What kind of sale is this? The team has to decide, or the individual has to decide and be consistent. I was talking to somebody just the other day who couldn't articulate if he sold a product or a service.
Hmm.
Well, if it's
That's
confusing to me, it's probably
right.
confusing to his customers.
Right.
The next one is managing by numbers. So this is the idea of the scorecard. And for the sales scorecard, we want the numbers to be as early in the sales process as possible. Those leading indicators that are going to tell you if you're going to hit your quota at the end of the quarter, the end of the week, whatever it is. So how early in the sales process can you measure? Is it number of dials, emails sent, LinkedIn connections, whatever it is, tracking that every single week, setting a goal and holding ourselves to that. And if the number goes off track, really having a conversation about what's going on here. Are we not following the process or whatever it is? Clear minimum standards. So the rules we play by, this is how we sell, this is not how we sell. Quotas, adherence to core values. There's been so many stories I've heard, and occasionally clients I've worked with where they've got somebody who actually is hitting their numbers, but does not live by the core values. And those are really painful situations. And it's part of my job as the implementer to say, look, I know they're hitting their numbers and I know it's going to be painful if they go away, but they are destroying your culture slowly but surely. And then eventually that poisons the whole company. You have to, and it can damage your reputation. There can be all kinds of collateral damage.
Well, if they're the top salesperson, then the other people are going to emulate that behavior.
Exactly.
They're going to say, well, this is how you really sell. I know the sales manager is saying we are committed this way, but Larry over there, he's doing all these things and he's the top salesperson, or she's the top salesperson. So
yeah, you get what you tolerate when it comes down to it. So the last piece here is taking the structure of the VTO, which is designed for the company vision. But what we found is that the highest performing salespeople create an individual VTO. So they get really clear about what is my vision? What do I value? What's my market segment? What are my 3-year picture? What's my 1-year plan? My quarterly rocks, my issues, and owning their own vision for what they need to do as a salesperson and setting very clear measurable goals and then having that consistent meeting pulse to hold them accountable to it. That really sets apart the rock star salespeople from the folks that are sort of just making it up as they go.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I was just thinking about a system for the top performers, because they do kind of run as an island within an organization, but they have a tremendous impact on the culture. And like Bill said, if the top one is not doing it right, everyone else is going to emulate that.
Yep.
And leadership loves the money coming in, and they just get so attracted by that. And I've seen it too, where a salesperson can erode a culture, and I think leadership defines a culture by what they're willing to tolerate too.
Yes.
And they do sell out on the values for money, and that's a sad situation to be in. And it's great that you're able to work with them. So, and how can people get a hold of you? We our podcast is worldwide, and is there a way for people to get a hold of you and find out more about the EOS system, or find out more about how you work with companies?
Yeah. So everyone's welcome to visit eosworldwide.com. You can download templates of a lot of the tools we talked about today and learn more about if you want to connect with an EOS implementer in your geography. We've got folks all over the world. I believe the show notes page today will include my contact information. So I've got my own page on that site. You can email me, and.schoolcraft@eosworldwide.com. If any of your listeners would like to have a free copy of Traction by Gino Wickman that explains the entrepreneurial operating system, I would be happy to send them a copy if they just send me an email.
Great. We'll have that information on the show notes. And again, this is episode 557. And thanks for joining us and sharing
great
the
having you.
EOS system. I've always looked at it going, where's the sales pie? And you made it really clear that within the sales pie, There's stuff that relates to sales in all of the 6 pieces, and you really introduce that to me in a different perspective. So now I can see how the EOS system can work within an organization and promote sales. As you know, the engine that pulls the train is sales. So check out the show notes, and we'll have a link there with Ann's email address as well.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ann. It was great. So as we wrap up today, we have a golden nugget. This is from Charles Kettering, who is an inventor. I believe he worked for GM. Anyway, he said, believe and act as if it were impossible to fail. So what would you do if you didn't think you could fail? What would you start? So
yeah, right. Commitment. I love that.
That's right.
It's a great quote.
Some of us should be committed.
Yeah. And be consistent in our commitments at the same time. So again, winningatselling.com, episode 557, and all of the information that we talked about will be there.
All right. Next week, well, April 1st is our 3-year anniversary, Scott, of the Winning and Selling podcast.
Every week, folks, never a week off.
So our book club will do chapter 8 of what great salespeople do. And then we'll talk about secrets to closing the sale. Secrets, not your obvious stuff, secrets. So subscribe, share the podcast with your colleagues on social media. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.